Jeanette SADIK-KHAN is a former commissioner of Mayor Bloomberg in New York City. She was responsible for the launch of bike sharing in New York, launching 650 kilometers of bike lanes in New York City, and one iconic photo. It's an iconic photo from Times Square showing the before and after on Times Square. Times Square used to be a very busy crossroads full of people and cars. All tourists in New York go to Times Square to see it, and most importantly to see its transformation, because now it's a pedestrian zone, one of the most successful ones in the world. So all of this will be covered by Jeanette in her presentation. The stage is yours, Jeanette.
Enjoy.
Jakuyo. Close, right? Good morning, good morning. And thank you, Roman, and thank you all for being here so early for this talk that we're going to have together and this conversation about Prague and about street fight and street fights. And it's amazing. I was here in Prague about 15 years ago, and it's extraordinary to see the changes already in 15 years. And we will talk about that later this morning. But we all know that change is so difficult. And I'm going to talk about the fights and the street fights that go into making that change and some of the changes in New York City. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge my colleague and co-conspirator and co-author Seth Solomano. Seth, it's amazing. So I'm going to start by asking all of you a question. What do you think of when you think of a street? What comes to mind? This is a question. People. Public space. Parked cars. Trees. Bike lanes. Nice. Noise. It's true. A lot of people think of a scene like this. And streets are what make some cities great and some cities not so great. But for the last 100 years, we've really looked at our streets from behind the dashboard of a car. And transportation engineers would take a look at a street like this and say, yeah, that's working fine. Nothing wrong with that. And it wasn't always this way. Our streets used to be these vibrant places where people shared the street, where there were walking and biking and street carriages. This is in Lower Manhattan on Mulberry Street 100 years ago. And this is it today. And you can see that the street has been taken over by parked cars to the point where little by little we lost the street. And we really lost the story of the city. And you can find much the same thing here in Prague. This is a 1902 postcard from what today is Narodní Street. And you can see people mixing with the streetcars and the horse-drawn carriages with a lady of the Church of the Snows in the background. It's a beautiful scene. And today, the church is still there, but I don't think that this is a view that would find its way onto many postcards. Our streets can be very lively places for people, but for the most of the last century, they've just been places for cars with devastating results. Lifeless streets like this one in Los Angeles are common in some of the most beloved cities in the world. But you look at this street, where are the people? No people. And even if you were there on that street, where would you even walk to? These kinds of roads did not happen by chance. They happened by design. And it reminds me of this video game I used to play called Frogger. Did anybody play Frogger? A couple people played Frogger? All right. I think this game should have been called Pedestrian. And here is the real-life translation in Prague. There are all sorts of signs for how a street should be used. But you can see the guy stranded here and how our streets have let him fall through the cracks. And this is played out in city after city. But the story of how we got there is pretty much the same. We stopped seeing our streets as places for people, and we started to view them as just places to park cars and as a way to get somewhere else. And you would think that after 100 years of putting in traffic signs and signals and building more lanes, that our streets would be safe and they would be free of traffic. But there's no place more in the world that is more deadly, more congested, more inequitable. There are 3.5 million people who die every year on roads around the world. 154 people will die just in the time that we have this discussion today. In the Czech Republic, 454 people died last year, and there were nearly 100,000 crashes. That is a big red flag of a problem. And what's our current strategy? To keep building more roads. But if building more roads solved our safety and congestion problems, we would have solved it decades ago. And you think about an analogy in the world of technology. You know, there was a time when computers took up entire floors, right, of office buildings. And think about what these computer engineers did. They didn't innovate by building bigger, slower mainframes. They innovated by making processors smaller, yet faster, powerful, yet less expensive. What if we applied that same design logic to our streets? Because streets don't update themselves. And when you think about it, so much has changed, particularly here in Prague. So much has changed in the last 60 years, socially, politically, economically, technologically, and yet our streets have remained the same. It's almost like they're trapped in amber. It's like they're Jurassic Park streets. We were thinking, wouldn't it be cool if you could just whip out your phone and you could hit a button to update your streets? You could just update and have safer streets. And you could push a button and you could have benches. Or you could have bike lanes and bus lanes. You could just push a button and go from a street like this to one that looks like this. And the closest thing we had to an update app was Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC agenda, which looked at how are we going to accommodate 1 million more people in New York City by 2030 and still improve the quality of life in our business districts and neighborhoods, while also reducing our greenhouse gases by 30%. And this strategy had profound implications for our streets, because we're not going to accommodate 1 million more people by double-decking our roads. We had to make it easier for people to walk, to bike, to take transit. So we created 7 rapid bus routes. We created 650 kilometers of new bike lanes. We created 60 new pedestrian plazas, and we had the lowest pedestrian fatalities in 100 years. So that's the short story. That's it. I could end the presentation here, and you'd say, nicely done. But the slightly longer version is that it was a fight to make these changes happen. Every day was a fight to change the culture of New York City. We were fighting to give people more options, and I learned some lessons along the way. And the first is you can paint the city you want to see. It doesn't take millions of dollars. It doesn't take years of planning studies. And you can accomplish a lot just with the materials that you have on hand. So shortly after I started as commissioner, we worked to create the first pedestrian plaza in Brooklyn. And we turned it from a place where people parked to a place where people wanted to be. And again, we did it fast, just with paint and planters. And this was really early tactical urbanism. And I want to recognize one of the early masters of the trade that's here today, Mike Lydon. Mike, where are you? Mike would actually hold meetings in this plaza in the early days of his work. And we made these transformations all over town. This is 14th Street and 9th Avenue, which had this really outdated traffic pattern. We created a space for people. Now people are there 3 a.m., 3 p.m. Apple, other stores moved in because of the foot traffic, because it was such an attractive place to be. This is Madison Square on 23rd Street. This used to be one of the largest, longest intersections in the city. There were 3 lanes coming together, and it was this tangle of traffic, and it was dangerous. And so we redesigned the street and created 6,000 square meters of new public space. And it was amazing. This is just the first one. We put out the orange barrels. Those orange barrels were there for just like 2 hours, and people just came to the space. You know, they were like, art class in 2 hours is sketching immediately in the space. It was like a Star Trek episode, like, whoop, suddenly all the people came. Where were they before? I don't know. But they were sketching in the street like in 2 hours. People are so hungry for public space. And today, it is one of the most successful public spaces in the city. People choose to sit in the street in that plaza rather than in the beautiful park next door, just to feel the energy of the city, the energy of the street. So after creating a showcase of projects, and again, we started our work not in Times Square. We started our work in communities where we knew they wanted us, right? To build a case of success, right? So after we did that and we showed what's possible, we took our toolkit to Times Square, crossroads of the world. How many of you have been to New York City, Times Square? Wow, that's pretty good. How many of you have been in the last 10 years? Wow, last 5 years? Wow. I think our tourism programs are working. Okay, so many of you know New York City in Manhattan is mostly on a grid above 14th Street. The one exception is Broadway, which cuts through that north-south grid. And that does great things. It creates these great squares where those 3 lanes come together, but it also creates these hot spots of congestion. And it was a big problem. 350,000 people were walking through Times Square every day, but they only had 10% of the space. And people tried to fix it, you know, slip lanes, changing the signals, trying everything, but it didn't work. Why? You know, when you think about it, you came to New York City, right? You're walking in Times Square, you're holding your kids, you're holding your friends' hands, and you're walking, you're looking up at all the billboards, right? And like, we're all standing behind you trying to get around you, like, because you're like blocking the street. And people jump into the street then, and they get hit. And so it was extremely dangerous, one of those dangerous corridors in New York City. So we took this idea to Mike Bloomberg that we were going to close Times Square to cars between 47th Street and 42nd Street. And we were going to open it to people. And we were going to do it as a pilot. We were going to test it and measure it and see if it worked. And if it worked, we would keep it. And if it didn't work, fine, no harm, we'll put it back to the way that it was before. So I went to City Hall to present this idea to the deputy mayors And the mayor asked all of the deputy mayors what they thought of this idea. I forgot to mention this is in the middle of his re-election campaign, which was kind of an important point. So he's in the middle of his re-election campaign, goes around, and every deputy mayor is like, And I'm sinking lower and lower into my chair, like I'm so depressed. And then Mike turns to me and he says, I don't ask my commissioners to do the right thing according to the political calendar. I ask my commissioners to do the right thing, period. And then he shook my hand and he said, let's do it. So we did it. So we rolled it out the barrels and people came out immediately. How many of you have worked on big projects? How many of you have been around big projects? Okay. So it turns out no matter how good your planning is, no matter how much time you anticipate what can happen with this project, somehow things can go sideways. And that's what happened here. We looked out, you can see, there's like 10,000 square meters of new public space. But we realized there was nothing there. We forgot to put something there. So we actually went to this hardware store in downtown Brooklyn and we bought hundreds and hundreds of beach chairs. All these beach chairs. And I have to tell you, the headlines the next day were not about the fact that we had closed Times Square to cars. It was about the beach chairs. Did you like the beach chairs? The color of the beach chairs? So I think if you ever find yourself with a problem on a big project, just bring beach chairs. That's what people are going to focus on. And today, you can see that this space is used for all kinds of things, for yoga classes, wedding proposals. You've probably seen the ball drop on New Year's Eve. And all these projects didn't just stop with temporary materials. They all went through the capital construction process. They went from paint to permanent construction. And if we'd gone through the traditional planning process, we would still be talking about this instead of enjoying the space today. And this model of moving fast to show what's possible translated from the streets of New York, like here in Times Square. This was an artist, Molly Dilworth, who created a river through Times Square, to streets around the United States. We implemented an asphalt art program in 2020 with Bloomberg Associates, providing funding and technical assistance to communities to transform their streets, to reimagine their streets during the lockdown and beyond, bringing placemaking, art, and safety to their streets. And then we expanded this program around the world, embedding safety and art into the streets of Brno, to Varna, Bulgaria, Zagreb, and even in a city of art like Florence. And there are 65 cities that are now part of Bloomberg Philanthropy's Asphalt Art Program. You can move quickly and inexpensively to bring safe and beautiful streets to your communities. And I encourage you to look up this Asphalt Art Initiative and apply for this funding, because it can really make a huge difference in your cities. But you know, all of this is more than just pretty pictures, right? We spent a lot of time measuring the impact of our work beyond with just what was happening with traffic speeds. We looked at the mobility benefits. In Times Square, traffic moved better by 17%. At the safety benefits, injuries went down 35%. And what was happening at the cash register? What happened to the businesses? You know, the businesses were freaked out. They would take the cars away, their businesses would go down. Times Square became one of the top 10 retail locations on the planet. It was a huge boon for business. And this data is extremely important. I work for a data-driven mayor. As Mike Bloomberg likes to say, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. I remember when we were talking about doing the Times Square project, and I was talking with the deputy mayor yesterday about data. And when I was talking about Times Square, you know, there's this method of measuring traffic where you take a car, you know, floating car, and it goes through the project. Before the project happens, you see what the travel time is, and then after the project is implemented and what the travel time is. So Mike Bloomberg turned to me and he's like, how do I know that your people are not just going to push the pedal down hard and zoom through and influence the outcome? Fortunately, we had GPS data from 1.1 million taxi trips to show what the before and after was, and that made a huge difference. And data makes a huge difference when you are describing the impact of projects, because so many people will say, traffic is slower, it's more dangerous, it doesn't work. But if you have the data, you make a very powerful case. So we brought lots and lots of data to our projects, and it really helped make the case and moved from the story, from the anecdote to analysis. And you can see some of the results. 50% increase in retail sales when we put down protected bike lanes, which really isn't surprising when you think about it, because cars don't shop, people do. And when you make it easier for people to go to stores, it's better for local businesses. And we saw the same results with our plazas and the same results with our bus lanes. But putting the economics aside, there is nothing that is more important than safety. And we used data from 7,000 crashes. It was the largest traffic study ever done in the United States. And we looked at the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why of traffic crashes. It was kind of our Rosetta Stone for making investments. And we did this because we knew that with leadership and with analysis, these crashes could be predicted and prevented. And we used this strategy to target dangerous intersections and dangerous corridors. And now we brought traffic deaths to their lowest level, down by a third, lowest level in over 100 years. Now, some of you may be a little skeptical about this, saying New York City is different, we're bigger, our streets are not the same, we have more transit. And I hear a lot of people saying, that could never happen here in Prague. That was also the feeling in Athens, where we worked with the mayor to reclaim the streets of Trigano. This was a historically commercial district, but it was overrun by cars, graffiti. This is 2015, and we worked with the mayor and his team to remove the graffiti from 30 city blocks, redesign these streets as attractive pedestrian walkways with benches and planters, and updated the lighting. And we started with temporary materials in 2017, and by 2019 it was made permanent. A great new pedestrian space, 24 new businesses, 7 new hotels, and it leveraged 30 million euros of new economic investment in the neighborhood. It can happen, and it can happen fast. This strategy has worked in cities like Istanbul, moving from temporary materials that just took days and weeks through full reconstruction with pavers and trees that provide shade, plenty of room to sit and to play. You can see similar results in Milan, where we worked with elementary school kids in Spoleto to design and paint a new pedestrian plaza outside of school where 5 streets collided. And that collision course is now turned into a safe space for the school kids who play and live there. And this was one of 40 piazzas that was transformed under Mayor Sala and his team. And you heard about this program from Stefano yesterday. He's a great leader of this program, so would not happen without the strong team that the mayor put into place. And of course, he's here today, along with our youngest street fighting recruit, because that's who we're doing it for. That's a big piece of this, is making our streets safe for people, making our streets safe for kids. And you don't have to look far to see the transformative power of reclaiming our streets. I was just in Bratislava and saw SMP Square, which was once dominated by cars, and today where people are on equal footing. And that's thanks to the great work of Maćka, Petra, Daniel, and Carolina. Raise your hands. This is a team that's done great work in Bratislava. It's amazing. And now Mayor Valo is looking to make new connections that do more than just link one neighborhood to another. It's about creating an entirely new set of possibilities for old streets. Repairing rifts that have divided the city for over 50 years. This is just the idea, but the concept is there. You've seen the transformative power of reclaiming streets right here in Prague by City Hall, which we saw yesterday, which was once dominated by cars, and today where people are front and center. You can see new possibilities on streets like with the new Holka Bridge, a gorgeous connection for people to walk on bike. I think this is the Charles Bridge of the 21st century. Amazing. And our streets can do so much more than just move cars, which is what many cities like Paris are doing on the Rue de Rivoli, transforming this traffic-choked corridor into a pedestrian corridor that actually moves more people. And all of these ideas are transferable because no one has a patent on pavement. Every city is different and has its own challenges, but we face many of the same problems. And when you see something that you think works in other cities, you can try it out on your own streets. And with 70 kilometers of bus lanes and over 571 kilometers of tram tracks, Prague rightly sees its streets as the rails for public transportation. And the rail network is the backbone for a walking city, a lifeline for local businesses and shops, and the anchor of a vibrant economy. And with the construction on Line D, the first expansion of the subway in 40 years, you are making investments in transit that are investments in the future of Prague. Whether above ground or below ground, transit is part of the transportation culture in Prague and in New York City. But I want to talk about something that isn't so much a part of the culture and wasn't so much a part of the culture in New York City 15 years ago. Bikes. Transit is a very important strategy, but if you want to make the most of your streets, it's really hard to beat a bike lane. How many of you ride bikes? Oh, wow. I want that picture. I never see that. Huh. That is great. How many of you rode bikes 10 years ago? Okay. You brave souls, you. But how many of you think that there's been a big difference in how you feel riding your bikes? Do you feel safer? Okay. We feel a little safer. Yeah, take that picture. Okay, so that's our problem statement. So I took a trip to Copenhagen when I was commissioner, and I was amazed at the work that they did because it was so simple. Just moving the parked cars away from the curb, creating this dedicated bike lane, protecting cyclists while protecting parking was such a win-win. And you know this in Prague. Like, taking away someone's parking space is like taking away their firstborn child. You know? It's just like, no. So this kind of a strategy is a win-win. And we did this all over the city, like here on Queens Boulevard, redesigning it as a safe space for people to walk and ride bikes on. It was also safer for drivers. Well-designed infrastructure brings order to the street. And there really wasn't much order when we started in 2007. But by 2013, we built 650 kilometers of new lanes, including the lane I showed you, the first parking protected lane in the United States. And this is the system today. And you can see it's a whole new body with whole new capillaries. 2,400 kilometers of bike lanes across the city. And I love doing this because it looks so easy. You just like go like that, you know, you push a button, and then all those lanes come on. Oh, easy, no problem. Yeah, just like that. No street fight, just push a button. And we're seeing an explosion of bike lanes all across the United States and all around the world, and not just in the cities where you'd expect it, in Amsterdam and Copenhagen, but in cities of all sizes and all shapes, where people need safe and affordable options to get from place to place. And it's happening here in Prague, which is nearly 368 kilometers of bike lanes. And from what I've seen and riding around yesterday, there is an opportunity to build a strong biking backbone in the city. And we took a great bike ride yesterday with Deputy Mayor Jeep to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of the city's biking network. And a big thanks to Petra and to Vojta A and Vojta B, the two Vojtas, Adam and the rest of the team that came on our ride. Please raise your hands and big round of applause. They did a great job, done a great job in organizing all of it. Really great. And you know, you don't have to look to just like New York or Copenhagen or Amsterdam for inspiration. We just came, you know, 2 days ago from Bratislava, and we rode in these protected bike lanes with Mayor Valo, who is taking bold steps to bring his city into a new era of mobility. Now, all of this is very easy to say. It's a little harder to pull off, because when you change the street, there are always bumps in the road. And when you push the status quo pushes back, and it pushes back hard. Does anybody know what street this is? Not Mike Lydon. Anybody know? You get a prize. Name the street. Okay, Mike Lydon, what is this? Prospect Park West. This was ground zero in our bike lane fight. And the local community asked us to fix this because the street was like this jetway. Cars were just zooming as fast as they could. It was a terribly dangerous space. So they asked us to put in a two-way bike path, and speeding went down, and bike riding went up, and there were fewer people riding on the sidewalk. Great, right? Everybody's a winner. Total success. Not so much. Yeah, don't block the flow. Everybody's complaining. Somehow this slower car speeds made the streets more dangerous. This was my favorite one, though. This I love. Don't be conned by SADIK-KHAN. I thought, that's so clever, you know? Bonus points there. I mean, who would want to ride on a scene like this, right? What a disaster. And this controversy on Prospect Park West led to this full-blown backlash. And Prague has seen similar street fights, with people thinking the lanes have gone too far, and others say they haven't gone far enough, and fights over whether Prague should lower the speed limit, which is something that New York did. So many fights. And it can be hard even if you know you're doing the right thing. But you need to stand your ground and make your decisions based on policy rather than the press. And when we launched City Bike, we knew it was going to be popular, but we also knew that we were going to be criticized along the way. And New York Magazine analyzed why City Bike elicited such strong reactions. And it turns out New Yorkers didn't like anything healthy. They didn't like anything that involved sharing. They didn't like anything environmental. And especially, they didn't like anything that was vaguely French. And today, the average bike rider in New York City looks more like the woman on the right rather than this Mad Max messenger on the left. And it's a big step Bikes are being used for commuting, for getting around, for running errands, for getting married. We didn't even stage that, it just happened. And it's very popular. People are way ahead of the press and the politicians when it comes to their streets. The last poll taken by the New York Times at the end of the Bloomberg administration found 73% of New Yorkers supported the bike share program. 72% supported the pedestrian plazas. And 64% supported the bike lanes. If this had been an election, it would have been a landslide. And it's not just in New York City. In city after city, the bad headlines are being replaced by good news stories like this. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, re-elected. London Mayor Khan, re-elected. Milan Mayor Salah, re-elected. Sydney Mayor Clover Moore, re-elected. Montreal Mayor Valerie Plante, re-elected. Bratislava Mayor Mateusz Valo, re-elected. Where mayors have implemented the most aggressive bike lane and pedestrian plans, they have been constantly and consistently re-elected, whether in New York or Detroit, Tel Aviv, Barcelona. They are increasingly the mark of a world-class city. But world-class cities and world-class streets don't build themselves. I run an organization called the Global Designing Cities Initiative, and we put out guidance that's been adopted by over 100 cities around the world. And it gives cities a permission slip to innovate, to make their streets better for transit, for walking, for cycling. And this guide has been translated into 7 languages. I know, sadly, not into Czech or Slovak. I'm sorry about that. We're working on it. Because the language of safe, sustainable streets is universal, and by flipping the hierarchy of the road that gave cars the most room and putting people last, to one that puts people first and prioritizes public transit and active mobility, that's the secret sauce. And this guide has been officially endorsed by over 100 cities on every continent, and we hope Prague will join this community of cities dedicated to streets that move and protect and invite people to reclaim their streets. We translated a first draft of what the design guide would look like if it was translated into Czech. And Deputy Mayor Hajib was nice enough to give the guide his seal of approval. And hopefully the official endorsement and adoption of the guide will come soon to take the guesswork and excuses out of street design. And people-focused street design in this guide is what can change a street like this one in Prague, like Zitna, from a river of car traffic into a boulevard that connects people with their city, that connects people with one another. And you know how to achieve this because you've already taken the first steps, going from streets that are places for cars to streets that are for people. This is Wenceslaus Square, which was once a shared street where people walked and rode carriages and trams. But for decades, it was dominated by cars and by taxis. And a redesign a few years ago restored it to a place for people to experience what the best of Prague has to offer. It's your timeless square. And reclaiming space is not just good for visitors. It also gives residents an invitation to come to the street and to stay there. And they put people on equal footing on the street after a century of domination by cars, showing the possibilities. Because it's not a question of engineering, it is a question of imagination. We know it's a fight to make streets for people. It's a street fight, but it's a fight that we can win, it's a fight that we must win, because when you change the street, you change the world. Thank you. Dziękuję.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you, Jeanette. Would you mind taking a seat next to me? The applause is yours. The applause is yours. It was a magnificent presentation, I believe, because you brought your experience down to the ground with your experience from yesterday and from your knowledge of Prague. Can you share one, two or three little details about what you really felt like after you finished your yesterday bike ride?
It was very exciting to see, I think, the energy in Prague after 15 years ago. You know, there were more people on the street. You had a very different feeling walking around than I did 15 years ago. But it's interesting because one of the hardest things to change in any city is actually the culture, right? People, it's kind of easy to make some of these changes, but it's hard to change the car-oriented culture. But I was very excited to see the amount of investment, you know, the 375 kilometers of bike lanes, you know, what you're doing with the construction of the new, you know, transit tunnel. These aren't boring infrastructure projects. These are, you know, your future. You are building, you know, an important future there. So, and the future is not about how many cars you move around. The future is about how many people you can get around safely.
Cool. You do a lot of projects around not only Europe, around the world. Can we zoom out a little bit? And when you come to a city, what are the 1, 2, 3, again, advices or steps to start with? What's the most important thing you feel? Because in the audience, we have people from Prague, from smaller or larger cities across the country. There is willingness to start. Sometimes not the feeling where to start completely. Can you share your experience on that?
I think it's very important to have a vision of where you are going. You know, you have to understand where you're going. You're not going to change the big ship of a city without having a plan to get there. And Mike Bloomberg's Plan YC agenda was that big vision for us. Other cities, same thing. When we were working in Detroit, when we're working in Barcelona, when we're doing work in Bogota, there's a vision. The mayor has a plan for what is going to be done. So a vision is important because not everybody is going to support all of the projects. Not everybody's going to like the bike lane. Not everybody's going to like the bus lane. Not everybody's going to like the pedestrian plaza. But if they have a sense of why you are doing it, that's very important. They get it. The second piece is to move fast. You need to move fast to make changes. And in New York City, people had almost given up hope. In 2007, when I was there, people thought, I don't know what she's on about. You know, our streets haven't changed for 50 years. She's not going to change them. Mike Bloomberg's not going to change them. But what we were able to do was actually show what was possible with paint. And you saw that in the presentation, right? Just with that paint. And that was really important for the public because we were able to say to them, look, we're just going to try it. And if it doesn't work out, it can go away. We can put the parking back. We can do, you know, we're trying this out. But moving fast gave a sense of momentum. And then finally, I would say measure. You have to measure the impact of your projects and programs because that will change the narrative. And I know that that's underway. We talked about improving the data collection in Prague, and I think that'll be a very important point of being able to tell a very positive story of change.
Cool. How do you build up for support in your experience? Support for such a grand visions for changing the cities? How do you really, where do you focus and what do you leave out?
Well, I have to say, you know, there was a lot of work that happened fast in New York City, but it was also the result of a long campaign by some amazing advocates. And you have many of those advocates here in this room. And the advocacy community paved the way, maybe paved the way is not the right word. Huh? Depaved the way for the progress in New York City, right? And so it is hard work, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, going to meetings, making the case, standing up for it, that's hard. That's the infrastructure of change that really needs to happen to sort of till the ground, before you come in. And so we were very supportive of that advocacy community. And, to all the advocates in this room, well done, because that is the hard part of change. And I think that's critical to getting the momentum behind progress.
Cool. In your experience, what is holding the cities, city halls and the people back, not going into the change? What is it? You mentioned already it's not a question of engineering, it's rather a question of imagination. But again, you can compare. There are no specialties probably among the cities in that sense.
No, I think that changing the culture, changing the hearts and minds of people is the hardest part, right? Because people are used to streets and cities looking the same way, and that's how it is. The streets are for cars. That's what they're for. That's what they've always been for. And changing that is hard. I used to joke with friends that if there was an alien that looked down on our planet and on our big cities, they would come to the conclusion that apparently what we worship are these big boxes on the street, because they have the pride of place. They are the center. All these boxes, these cars apparently are what we hold most valuable. And so, but the thing that is very exciting is that it doesn't take much to change it. We did this change in 6 years, right? All of this change. And so, having the vision, having the political courage, and also standing by your work, because, not everybody is going to be happy, and you really have to have the power of your convictions to see projects through. And I think that's a big piece.
Before I give the mics to the audience here, one last in this part, how do you react when people in the city say, well, we are not New York, we are not Amsterdam, we are not Copenhagen?
Yeah, no, they used to say that about New York. We're not Amsterdam, we're not Copenhagen, what are you doing? Bring that crazy ideas over there. And now it's so amazing because people now say, like, we're not New York, right? So, again, it can be done, and it has been done, and it's really exciting to see so many cities, so many mayors that are moving forward with projects that make it easier to walk and bike and take transit, because they understand that that is the economic and climate strategy going forward. That's where people want to live. They want to live in places where it's easier to walk and bike and get around. And so it's really about the economic future of the city. These aren't just crunchy granola things to have, right? These are solid economic development investments and climate investments in a better city that will attract more people.
Cool. Well, I got a long list of questions, but first we have an amazing audience here. So please raise your hands, mics are coming.
Thank you very much. I have a question about Bratislava because I'm an advocate there. I want to ask you, as many of you know, very recently we had a general elections, and also we have an amazing new bike lane on our riverside. And some populist and fascist parties, they use this cycle lane as an I think, ideology theme for the elections, and there was a big backlash on social media. And I want to ask you, what did you say to Mayor Velo about this, and if you think he will continue in this very good project, as I hope he will?
I said 2 words: keep going. It's
Thank you.
Well, it was same what Stefano said yesterday, probably. Don't stop at the first no. And I think it's a wonderful theme that goes throughout the whole conference of yesterday and today. Janette only confirming this. So.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When I was in, when we were in the middle of our bike battles, I went up to Toronto, and I was at this meeting after giving a talk, and this question from the audience was, how did you get 100% support behind your bike lanes? I was like, there's never 100% support behind the bike lanes. There will be periods, you know, there's that adjustment. And then people do adjust, and then it's like it's been there forever. You know, in Times Square, when we left office, one of the first things that the incoming mayor said that he was going to do was to put the cars back into Times Square. And Seth and I were getting ready to get into battle on this, and we didn't need to, because New Yorkers came out. They were like, you can't put the cars back in Times Square. It was like a huge outcry. And it's so amazing, because 6.5 years ago, it was such a different culture. And 6.5 years later, it was like a new road order. People had changed. Their vocabulary had changed. And so I think that's part of the process underway in Bratislava.
Thank you. Another question from the audience here.
I'm sorry, not
A mic is coming there.
not a question, just an addition, because I found a copy of an article from Slovak newspaper, 2012, and it was written by Matúš Valo, at the time just urbanist, not a mayor, and it's called "You Have to Have a Vision," and it's your photo here. So you only need time and keep your vision go on. So it's hope for you. And thank you.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah,
We have to get that article.
Yeah, there's a question here in the middle. Yash Gabino, please.
Good morning, Janet. Thank you very much for this great presentation. I was really impressed. And I wish we would be able to implement these things in Prague as well. And I think it would be great if you had a chance to come to Prague City Assembly meeting. And because the discussions there...
Sounds like a cool idea.
And present this at Prague City Assembly meetings, because if you heard the discussions, just when we want to introduce some traffic restrictions in the city center. So the main arguments are that first we must complete the ring roads and the main arteries, and then we can do something. We will see. And I would like to ask you, what would you tell people who believe that more roads will solve our traffic problems?
You know, there's this great line by Lewis Mumford, right? That was basically like, building more roads to solve congestion is like loosening your belt to solve for obesity, right? It doesn't work. And after 100 years of building roads, right, all we have is more congestion. So the experiment failed. That strategy failed. And we need a new strategy. And that's what you're seeing. That's why so many cities are doubling down on transit and walking and biking, because they know that's the only way that they're actually going to make their city better for mobility. These strategies, it's important to say, these are not anti-car strategies. They're not. The car has a place. It's just that they're pro-options. We want to give people more options so that they're not forced to have to drive. And that's a big part of the solution.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Okay, there's a mic over there. Thank you.
I have one. I'm the coordinator of the sustainable urban mobility plan in Prague, in the city. And I have one question. In your project, when you advocate like more pedestrian infrastructure and cycling infrastructure, how do you argue that some of the parking places will be inevitably removed? Do you just ignore the opinion that people will have hard times to park their cars and wait until they will get rid of some of the number of the cars and so on? Or how do you deal with this very frequent objections that people won't have any chance to park their cars?
It's very, very important to do the public outreach, right? When we put down the first parking protected lanes on 8th and 9th Avenue, we went door to door with every single business, every single school, every single church. We went all up and down, and we had conversations with every single one of those people and organizations. And the interesting piece was that so many of the regulations, the street regulations on those streets, had not changed also in 50 years. And we were actually able to update some of the regulations to make it easier for deliveries, to change the hours of parking. So we were able to actually improve some of the curb usage for those people on that street. There is, I think, it underscores the importance of having a vision for what you are doing. If you're just doing a one-off project that looks like, you know, you're taking away 10 parking spaces and people don't know why, and they just come one day and there's no space for their cars, they will be crazy upset, right? You have to have a reason and a vision for what you're trying to do. And again, you're trying to provide options. It's not you're just taking the cars away, period. You are trying to build a better city, but they need to know why. And it's not just one project, right? It has to be part of a whole program. And I think that's really key. But having those conversations, painful as they are extremely important to do. When we launched our bike share program, we knew that there was going to be this backlash, and I mentioned this in the presentation, right? We knew, because we were taking away parking and putting in bike share stations, big bike share stations, right, in front of a lot of residential apartment buildings, in front of a lot of stores that were used to having their cars just right there and easy access. But what we did is we did, 65 on-site meetings with the actual maps. We did hundreds and hundreds of meetings with elected officials, with local residents. We did online meetings. We documented everything. So these maps, everybody could see where the bike stations would go. Then they were able to vote on their top 3 locations where they wanted them to be. And that's how we came up with a map. Now, why am I telling you this? Because we then we put out a report detailing all of the public outreach we did, because we knew when we officially launched the program, people would say, I never heard about this. You never talked to us about this. And we had given the report to all of the reporters before we launched. And so they all went through and saw all of the outreach that had been done. So that kind of changed the whole reporting on the program, right? It wasn't like, I had no idea, this came out of nowhere, this is crazy talk, right? They had this report right in front of them. So documenting your outreach is also a very important part of that program.
Yeah, but when you have a very high car ownership, which is the case in Prague, people have many cars. So inevitably, you will make them hard times because they have to put their car somewhere instead of their street. So I understand that communication is very important by actually you make the situation, at least in the beginning, quite difficult for many people owning cars. Yeah.
I think the piece too is you have to provide those options. You can't wish people onto a bike. You can't wish people onto a bus. You have to give them high quality alternatives. You can't just say no car, and by the way, you have no other way to get around, right? You have to provide the options. You take a look at, cities are struggling with this. It's not just Prague, right? And, I understand the difficulty. Like I said, taking away a parking space is like taking away someone's kid. Like they feel very personal about their parking space. But again, when you are making changes, big changes, you have to provide, alternatives. London, when they launched their congestion pricing program, they first they added 300 new buses, right? A brand new bus. So buses came like every 3 minutes, right? Every 2 minutes, every minute. And so you made it possible for people not to take their car. And so that was a big part of the process. So again, it can be hard because you have to bring a systems view, right? You have to look at, it's not just one street or 2 streets, it's a whole network.
Yeah, okay. Well, before you get with the questions, I'll ask Jeanette a few of my list. And that would be, we mentioned data already here, the importance of data. But we all know there could be good data or poor data. Can you share from your experience how to collect meaningfully data, and what in your experience from other projects you feel like are the most impactful sets of data, for instance? Because I'll start with an example. I've learned when Ada Colau in Barcelona started with Superblocks, one of the KPIs was the growth in social interactions, including hugs and kisses in the newly created social spaces for people that had been taken away from cars. And it might sound funny, but they were able to really document it. And that's about the quality of life. So maybe you have another experience or sets, examples you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go into details of traffic engineering and data collection, but I will say that it's important to update your metrics, because our data collection systems are generally about measuring how fast cars go from point A to point B. And that's not the goal, is to move cars as fast as possible from point A to point B. So we actually, when I came in, changed how we collected the data and what data we were collecting. I don't know how it is here, but in New York City, we were collecting data. I had no idea why we were collecting this data. It didn't really tell us anything. So we sort of changed how we did it, and we changed how we measured the street. And we wrote a book, wrote a guide called Measuring the Street, and you can find it online. And it details how we looked at what are the economic benefits, that data collection. What are the safety benefits, that collection. What's the mobility benefits beyond just the car, and how do you collect that data? So it's a different, you're measuring for different outcomes. If your outcome is just speeding cars, then our system is great. But if you want different outcomes, you need different metrics.
Cool. Another set of important strategies turns around communication. Storytelling, you are a living example how to do that well. The invitation to the next City Hall meeting in Prague is in place.
Great.
Yeah, but again, if there are cities, smaller city squares, how do you help these people, Janette, with starting to reframe the whole mobility and city change story? Where do you start with? You already mentioned it's not about cars, it's about people. A few more tips from your end?
Well, again, I mean, I did say that you need to have a vision to start, and then you're talking about executing that vision. And, you know, I think that and again, I think it's very important to underscore, it's not anti-car, it's pro-choices. That's what we're talking about, is pro-choices. And it's pro-safety. Safety is extremely important. I mean, you look at the number of people, 484 people dead in the Czech Republic, 100,000 people injured, seriously. It's a terrible situation, you know, and you talk personally with people whose kids or family members have been killed. It is not a light thing, and yet we don't really focus on it the way we should. And so safety is at the heart of all of the work, and it's very important to talk about the safety impacts of that. And, you know, similarly, what you're trying to do here, beyond the providing choices, making it safe, there is a lot to be learned about vocabulary. You know, and we've learned things the hard way. I've talked to Petra and others about, we've got a program for congestion pricing in New York City. We're going to charge people who come in during the busiest time of day into the central business district, an area where people have a lot of options to come in. But we've called this program congestion pricing, which are like two words that could not be worse: congestion and pricing. And you put them together. Does anybody want congestion pricing? Does anyone want to pay for traffic? It's like terrible, right? Like, call it like go zone or green, or decongestion. I mean, when we did Times Square, we didn't call it pedestrian oasis. We called it green light for Midtown, right? Traffic was actually going to be moving better. So the messaging and the vocabulary is really as important as the quality of the projects.
I'm so glad to say it, because one of my pet peeves is, of course, we're not closing the streets. We are opening the streets whenever we close it only for cars and opening it for people. Walking, cycling, no matter it is, no matter how temporary it is. But still, it sometimes feels like it's play of words. Actually, it's change of meaning. Safety, you mentioned, and the number of lives that get lost in a country with such a strong automotive heritage like Czech Republic is. Would you maybe have one or two, again, tips how to deal with this contradiction? Okay, one way it's industry behind with all the lobbying behind, and US is not different in that case. But still, there is a bigger future, bigger vision to change from traffic to mobility, from cars to people.
You know, I think businesses actually get it, because you sort of understand that, like, businesses and people can move anywhere, right? And they are increasingly moving to places where it is easier to get around, where you don't have to have a car, where you do feel safe raising your kids. And so, you know, that's the economic model for the 21st century. And so I think, again, it's an important investment strategy if you want to grow your local economy and your national economy. These are investments, you know, in people that have long-term benefits much farther than you might imagine.
Thank you, Janet. Questions from the audience? Let's use the opportunity. Oh yeah, there's one coming. Yeah, thank you. Wait for the mic, please.
Thank you. Hello. I cannot really stand up, so I'll keep sitting if it's okay. And I have a question for you, Janet, because you put a lot of effort into the redesign of New York City streets, and now you travel the world and help cities around the world to transform, like you help transform New York. And my question is, what is your, now that you're no longer the Transportation Commissioner, what is your connection to the redesign of the streets of New York nowadays? If you're still active in this field somehow, or if you're just an observer?
Thank you for that question. It was not planted. I'm still active in New York City through various not-for-profits, the Regional Plan Association, and more local organizations. So there's a very active community that is passionate about continuing the progress, you know, that's been made. We had a strong foundation. You know, Mayor Bloomberg always asks me, the first thing he says to me is, did anything roll back? Did they take back any bike lanes, bus lanes, plazas? Did they take anything back? You know, and it's really interesting because that progress has just continued. And a big part of the reason why it continued is because we turned a lot of our projects and programs into application-based programs. So communities could apply for bike parking. Communities could apply for plazas. Communities drove the next program investments. Why is that important? Because it doesn't matter who the mayor is then or who the commissioner is, because there was such a demand when we left. And it changed the relationship with government. It wasn't New York City DOT going in and saying, here's your project. It was the communities coming to us and saying, we want this project. And they documented the political support, the local support, business support for these different programs. So that was a very, very important piece. Now we work directly for mayors around the world. Mike started a consulting firm after we left office, and as part of his Bloomberg Philanthropies. And so we now work as consultants directly for mayors around the world on a pro bono basis. We're not paid for our work, right? But in exchange for our services, the mayor agrees to implement the programs that we recommend. So we work together with the city as a team, you know? And the reason why that works so well is because we're not looking for a contract, we're not looking for money. We are just looking to make that mayor and that administration successful. And so we can have very candid conversations about what works and what doesn't, and we work on the priorities that that mayor has. And so, in a way, so we continue to bring that same kind of experience and work and the roll up your sleeves, design the streets type of work to mayors in different cities around the world. So it's a great job.
An important one, I would say. Applause for you and your team. Thank you for the applause, your amazing audience. Thanks for the co-play. Before we wrap it up and move over to a gift session, because Jeanette and Petra arranged, with the support of Nextbike and the City Hall of Prague, a gift that means the books for you. One last question. What was one of the latest tactical urbanism changes around the cities, around the world, that really caught your interest and you felt like, ha, that's really nice? It's smaller, big, doesn't matter.
I think that the super blocks in Barcelona are really pretty amazing. And I think the Barrios Vitales work under Claudia Lopez in Bogota is really amazing. Those are two that are really transformative. I have to say, the Holka Bridge, very inspiring, So I would put that new piece of jewelry that you have for the city, like right up there. It's really amazing. But, I love the fact that mayors are so competitive now. Who can be the greenest? Who can build the most bike lanes? Who can build the most bus lanes? Who can build the coolest new pedestrian and cycling bridge? It's a very exciting time. So, congratulations to the work that's underway, and, we look forward to seeing more progress in the months and years to come.
Well, it's perfect. Congratulations, and thank you, Jeanette. Applause for you, and Seth, of course. Thanks for coming to Prague.